A washed-up MMA fighter targets an innocent elderly couple at their favorite diner, shoving the 75-year-old husband and grabbing his terrified wife's wrist while other customers cower in fear. The drunk bully towers over them, threatening violence, as he humiliates these defenseless seniors who just wanted a quiet dinner. But the stocky stranger reading quietly in the corner booth isn't just another customer. This is Mike Tyson himself. The retired fighter has no idea he just assaulted an elderly couple in front of a man who spent decades destroying opponents with devastating precision. While the thug continues his rampage, the boxing legend rises from his seat with that legendary calm that once struck terror into heavyweight champions worldwide. The old couple recognizes their savior immediately, knowing they're about to witness justice delivered by iron fists. The bully keeps running his mouth, drunk on power and whiskey, completely unaware he's seconds away from facing the most dangerous man on the planet. What happens when you pick the wrong fight in front of the wrong legend? Will the MMA fighter survive learning why some champions never truly retire? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October evening air carried a crisp bite as Frank Castellano guided his 1998 Honda Accord into the familiar parking space outside Murphy's Family Diner. At 75, his weathered hands still moved with the precision of a man who'd spent 5 decades operating heavy machinery, though they trembled slightly more than they used to. He walked around to the passenger side, opening the door for his wife of 52 years. "Thank you, dear," Dolores said, accepting his steady arm as she stepped onto the cracked asphalt. At 73, she moved carefully, her arthritis making each step deliberate, but her brown eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had captured Frank's heart back in 1972. They made their way toward the diner's familiar neon sign, Frank's hand resting protectively on the small of Dolores's back. This had been their ritual every Friday night for 12 years running. Same time, same booth, same sense of quiet contentment that came from simple pleasures shared. Jimmy Murphy spotted them through the window and had their coffee brewing before they reached the door. The 58-year-old owner had inherited the diner from his father 30 years ago, and the Castellanos were more than customers. They were family. "Evening, Frank." "Dolores." Jimmy's Irish accent had softened over the decades, but never disappeared entirely. "How's that grandson of yours doing with those college applications?" Frank's face lit up as he helped Dolores slide into their usual booth by the window. "Billy's looking at state on a wrestling scholarship. Can you believe it? Kid's got more talent in his little finger than I ever had. Takes after his grandfather," Dolores said, patting Frank's hand. "You should see the way Billy talks about Frank's construction stories. Makes building the garden sound like conquering Mount Everest." The diner hummed with its typical Friday night energy. Working families occupied most of the red vinyl booths, parents corralling children while trying to enjoy a night out. The smell of Jimmy's famous meatloaf mixed with fresh coffee and apple pie. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your usual order. Frank ordered his standard meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Dolores went with the salmon, making sure Jimmy knew to go easy on the butter, doctor's orders. They settled into comfortable conversation about their week, their neighborhood, their plans for visiting Billy's next wrestling match. "I'll never understand how that boy can twist himself into pretzels like that," Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "When I was his age, pulling yourself up on a construction beam was about as athletic as it got." "Different times," Dolores agreed, sipping her coffee. "But the important things stay the same. Hard work, respect, taking care of family." As Dolores excused herself to the restroom, Frank glanced around the familiar space. Most everything looked exactly as it had for decades. The checkered floor, the rotating pie case, the black and white photos of old queens covering the walls. But something felt different tonight. The bar area. A large man hunched over empty shot glasses, his voice getting louder with each drink. Frank had seen his type before on construction sites, the kind who carried anger like a weapon, always looking for someone to blame for their problems. The man's fourth whiskey arrived as Frank watched, and something in the stranger's posture made the old foreman's instincts prickle with warning. Derek Kozlov's massive frame sagged against the bar as he stared into his empty shot glass, the amber liquid doing nothing to wash away the bitter taste of failure. At 35, he should have been in his prime, should have been headlining pay-per-view events and counting millions. Instead, he was nursing his last unemployment check in a Queens diner, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The steroid scandal 2 years ago had destroyed everything. One positive test had cost him his sponsorships, his ranking, his girlfriend, and his future. The media had crucified him, calling him a cheater and a fraud. Nobody cared that half the guys he'd fought were juicing too. He was just the one who got caught. Another? Jimmy Murphy asked, eyeing Derek's condition with growing concern. Derek nodded, pushing the glass forward with fingers thick as sausages. The bartender hesitated but poured anyway, though his movements suggested this would be the last one through the whiskey haze. Derek's mind wandered to better times. The roar of crowds, the feeling of crushing opponents, the respect in people's eyes when he walked into a room. Now landlords threatened eviction, former friends crossed the street to avoid him, and his phone stayed silent except for bill collectors. His cell buzzed against the bar, another text from his landlord about overdue rent. Derek deleted it without reading, the motion making his vision swim slightly. 3 months behind, and his part-time bouncer job barely covered groceries. The mighty destroyer, reduced to throwing out drunk college kids for $200 a week, takes after his grandfather. He heard the old woman say from the nearby booth, "You should see the way Billy talks about Frank's construction stories." Derek's bloodshot eyes focused on the elderly couple, their obvious contentment grating against his misery. The old man's face glowed with pride as he talked about his grandson's wrestling scholarship. State University, full ride, bright future stretching ahead like a golden highway. Everything Derek had lost, this kid was just getting started with. The injustice of it burned in his chest, mixing toxic with the alcohol. Where was Derek's second chance? Where was his bright future? Instead, he got nothing but closed doors and whispered accusations. "Billy's looking at state on a wrestling scholarship," the old man continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose family was succeeding. "Can you believe it? Kid's got more talent in his little finger than I ever had." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. Talent. The kid had talent, just like Derek once had. But where had talent gotten him? Destroyed by one mistake. One moment of weakness when the pressure got too much and the needle seemed like the only way to keep up. His knuckles whitened around the shot glass. These people had no idea what real struggle looked like. Sitting in their comfortable booth, talking about scholarships and bright futures, while Derek's world crumbled around him. They probably went home to warm beds and paid mortgages every night, never knowing what it felt like to lose everything. The whiskey burned as it went down, but not as much as the resentment building in his chest. Success came so easy to some people, so impossible for others. And sometimes, Derek thought grimly, the universe needed help balancing the scales. Dolores returned from the restroom, her cane tapping softly against the checkered floor as she navigated between tables. The arthritis made walking more challenging these days, but she maintained the dignified posture of a woman who'd spent 35 years commanding elementary school classrooms. Frank immediately stood, the gesture as automatic as breathing after 52 years of marriage. He gently guided her chair as she settled back into the booth, their movements rehearsed through decades of care and consideration. As he leaned over to help position her seat properly, Frank's elbow brushed against the bar stool behind him. The contact was slight, barely noticeable, but enough to cause the large man perched there to lurch forward. Whiskey splashed across his shirt as the glass tilted in his unsteady grip. Derek whirled around, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. "Watch where you're going, old man." The words cut through the diner's ambient noise like a blade. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to quiet as the atmosphere shifted from comfortable to tense. Frank's weathered face immediately showed concern. "I'm terribly sorry, son. Please, let me pay for your dry cleaning. It was completely my fault." But Derek was already rising to his full height, 6'3" of steroid-enhanced muscle towering over the elderly man. Up close, his size was even more intimidating. Thick neck, massive shoulders, hands that could crush a man's windpipe without effort. "You people think you own the world, don't you?" Derek's voice carried the dangerous edge of someone with nothing left to lose. coming in here like you're better than everyone else. Dolores's gentle hand found Frank's arm, a calming touch that had defused countless situations over the years. But her brown eyes showed the first flicker of real fear as Derek's shadow fell across their table. "Sir, please," Frank said, his construction foreman's experience with difficult personalities keeping his voice steady. "There's no need for trouble. I apologize for the accident." Other diners watched in frozen silence, parents instinctively moving closer to their children. Jimmy Murphy started moving from behind the counter, but Derek's imposing presence made him hesitate. The Irishman had broken up his share of fights over the years, but this felt different, more dangerous. "Trouble?" Derek laughed, the sound ugly and bitter. "You don't know what trouble is, Pops. You sit here in your little bubble, talking about wrestling scholarships and bright futures, while real people struggle in the real world." Frank's protective instincts flared as Derek stepped closer to their booth. The old man might be 75, but 5 decades of construction work had taught him to recognize genuine threats. This wasn't just a drunk looking to complain. This was someone on the edge, someone who'd snapped. "I don't want any problems," Frank said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd supervised construction crews for half a century. "But I won't have you frightening my wife." Derek's cold blue eyes shifted to Dolores, who sat perfectly still despite her obvious fear. Something predatory flickered in his expression, the look of someone who'd found exactly the pressure point he was looking for. "Your wife." Derek's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Maybe she needs to learn some respect too." The threat hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the comfortable atmosphere that had defined Murphy's family diner for 3 decades. Frank felt his muscles tense, his old body preparing for whatever came next. Behind Derek, Jimmy Murphy's hand moved toward the phone, ready to call for help. But in the corner booth, unseen by most, a stocky figure in a navy suit slowly closed his magazine and began to rise in the farthest corner booth, where shadows gathered beneath the dim overhead lamp. Mike Tyson had been enjoying the kind of peaceful anonymity that money couldn't buy. The leather-bound copy of The Racing Pigeon lay open before him, its pages filled with technical discussions about breeding and training, a passion that few people associated with the former heavyweight champion of the world at T57. Tyson still carried the physical presence that had intimidated a generation of fighters, though he worked hard to keep that side of himself hidden from public view. The navy suit was perfectly tailored, his graying hair neatly trimmed, his demeanor that of a successful businessman rather than a legendary destroyer of men. He'd been coming to Murphy's for months, drawn by the simple humanity of the place. No cameras, no autograph seekers, no one wanting to relive his greatest victories or worst defeats. Just good food, honest people, and the kind of peace that had taken him decades to find. But peace was a fragile thing, especially when predators began circling the innocent. That Tyson's dark eyes had been tracking the confrontation from the moment the drunk's voice rose above the normal dinner conversation. His fighter's instincts automatically cataloged threats, the man's size, his aggressive posture, the way other diners shrank back in fear. Most troubling was the way the stranger focused on the elderly couple, like a shark sensing blood in the water. The old man's dignity in the face of intimidation reminded Tyson of Cus D'Amato's elderly friends, the people who'd shown him kindness when the rest of the world saw only violence and rage. They'd taught him that true strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, not preying on weakness. As the confrontation escalated, Tyson felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling that had driven him to greatness, and occasionally to destruction. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, but he'd worked too hard to build this quiet life to throw it away on a bar fight. The magazine pages rustled as his hands unconsciously formed fists, the knuckles showing the accumulated damage of thousands of training sessions and dozens of professional fights. Those hands had generated more knockout power than perhaps any fighter in history, but they'd also learned restraint through hard-earned wisdom. "Your wife?" The drunk's voice carried clearly across the diner. "Maybe she needs to learn some respect, too." The words hit Tyson like a physical blow. Threatening an elderly woman crossed every line he'd ever drawn, violated every code he'd learned to live by. The magazine closed with a soft snap as he placed it carefully on the table, his movements deliberate and controlled. The chair scraped against the floor as he began to rise, his full attention focused on the unfolding situation. The drunk had no idea that his casual cruelty had awakened something that had been sleeping quietly in the corner. Something that had once been the most feared man on the planet. The Tyson's presence began to fill the space around him, though most of the diner remained focused on the immediate confrontation. Only Jimmy Murphy, wiping glasses behind the counter, glanced over and felt his breath catch in recognition. The elderly woman sat perfectly still, her dignity intact despite her obvious fear. Her husband positioned himself protectively, ready to fight despite the impossible odds. Their courage in the face of overwhelming threat reminded Tyson exactly why some battles couldn't be avoided. As the drunk stepped closer to their booth, Tyson moved away from his corner table, his athlete's grace unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look. The most dangerous man in the room was about to make himself known, and the drunk bully had no idea his world was about to change forever. Derek stepped closer to the booth, using every inch of his 6'3" frame to cast a shadow over the elderly couple. The whiskey had stripped away what little restraint he possessed, leaving only raw resentment and the need to make someone else hurt as much as he did. Frank remained seated but straightened his shoulders, drawing on 5 decades of experience dealing with bullies on construction sites. He'd faced down plenty of tough guys over the years, men who thought size and aggression could substitute for competence and character. "Son, I can see you're having a rough night," Frank said, his voice carrying the steady authority of someone who'd supervised crews through dangerous situations. "Why don't you let me buy you dinner? We can sit down, talk this through like civilized people." Derek's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Dinner? I don't want your charity, you old fool." His massive hand gestured dismissively at the comfortable booth. The half-finished meals, the simple contentment that had defined the Castellanos' evening. "You think throwing money around fixes everything? You think that makes you better than people like me?" The words carried years of accumulated frustration. Every sponsor who'd dropped him, every door that had slammed shut, every person who'd crossed the street to avoid the disgraced fighter. Here was everything he'd lost, sitting peacefully in a booth, completely unaware of how good they had it. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Frank replied quietly. "I just think we can work this out without." Derek's hand shot out, connecting with Frank's chest in a hard shove that sent the 75-year-old man crashing back into the vinyl booth. The impact jarred Frank's spine, causing Dolores to cry out as her husband's body pressed against her. The sound that escaped Dolores's lips, part fear, part pain for her husband, cut through the diner like a knife. Every patron froze, forks suspended in midair, conversations dying in their throats. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, recognizing that something had crossed from uncomfortable to dangerous. Jimmy Murphy dropped the glass he'd been cleaning, the sound of shattering crystal adding to the tension. His hand moved toward the phone mounted behind the register, but Derek's cold blue eyes locked onto him with predatory focus. "Nobody calls anybody," Derek snarled, pointing a thick finger at the Irishman. "This is between me and Grandpa here, unless you want to be next." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jimmy's hand hovered over the phone, torn between his duty to protect his customers and his very real fear of what the massive stranger might do. At 58, the diner owner had broken up his share of fights, but this felt different, more volatile, more personal. Frank struggled to right himself, one arm wrapping protectively around Dolores as she trembled against him. The shove had been hard enough to leave bruises, but more than physical pain, it was the violation of basic human decency that stung. In 52 years of marriage, no one had ever laid a hand on either of them in anger. "You want to know what respect looks like?" Derek continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent diner. His alcohol-clouded gaze fixed on Dolores, who sat perfectly still despite her obvious terror. As Derek's hand reached toward Dolores's frail wrist, the sound of a chair scraping against the checkered floor cut through the tension. In the far corner booth, a stocky figure in a navy suit began to rise, his movement fluid and purposeful despite his age. The drunk bully was so focused on his victims that he didn't notice the predator awakening behind him. Derek's thick fingers closed around Dolores's wrist with casual cruelty, making the elderly woman whimper as his grip tightened. The sound was soft but carried clearly through the dead silence of the diner, causing several patrons to gasp in horror. "Please," Dolores whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying all the dignity of someone who'd never begged for anything in her 73 years. "That's enough." The voice cut through the tension like a blade. Deep, controlled, carrying an authority that made everyone in the diner turn instinctively toward its source. The stocky man in the navy suit approached with measured steps, his gait unmistakable to anyone who understood the science of violence. Jimmy Murphy's eyes widened first, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. The glass he'd been reaching for slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor in a cascade of crystal fragments. "Mike!" Jimmy's voice cracked with amazement. "Mike Tyson!" The name rippled through the diner like electricity. Cell phones emerged from pockets and purses as patrons realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The quiet man who'd been reading peacefully in the corner booth wasn't just another customer. He was one of the most dangerous human beings who'd ever lived. Derek released Dolores's wrist and spun around, his alcohol-clouded mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Mike Tyson stood 3 feet away, shorter than Derek, but somehow filling the space around him with a presence that made the air itself feel heavier. For a moment, Derek's bravado faltered. Every fight fan knew the stories, the devastating knockouts, the psychological warfare, the aura of controlled violence that had terrorized heavyweight boxing for over a decade. This was Iron Mike Tyson, the man who destroyed legends and reduced grown men to quivering wrecks with nothing more than a stare. But the whiskey coursing through Derek's system transformed fear into something else entirely: desperate opportunity. His ruined career, his shattered reputation, his complete fall from grace. All of it could be erased with one moment of glory. If he could take down the great Mike Tyson, especially in front of all these cameras, he'd be more than redeemed. He'd be immortal. A sneer spread across Derek's bruised features as he straightened to his full height, towering over the former champion. Well, the great Mike Tyson. His voice carried new confidence, playing to the audience of cell phone cameras now recording every word. "Heard you were washed up, but I didn't know you were this pathetic." He spread his massive arms wide, addressing the room like a ringside announcer. "Iron Mike wants to play hero for Grandpa and Grandma here. The mighty champion, reduced to saving old folks in diners." Derek's laugh was ugly and mocking. "This should be interesting." Tyson remained perfectly still, his dark eyes studying Derek, with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. The former champion had seen this type before: desperate men who mistook his current restraint for weakness, who thought age had diminished what he truly was. Frank helped Dolores rub feeling back into her wrist, both of them staring in amazement at their unlikely savior. The man who defined their generation's understanding of boxing power stood between them and danger, as calm as if he were still reading his magazine. Derek began to circle, his MMA training evident in his predatory movement despite his intoxication. The cameras followed his every step, social media already exploding with news that Mike Tyson was about to fight in a Queen's diner. "You know what, old man?" Derek's voice carried the dangerous edge of someone with nothing left to lose. "I've always wondered how a boxer would do against a real fighter. Guess tonight's my lucky night." The challenge hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the diner held their breath, sensing they were about to witness something that would be remembered long after the last table was cleared. Tyson took another measured step forward, his voice carrying the steel-wrapped in silk tone that had once struck fear into heavyweight champions worldwide. "I'm asking you nicely to apologize to these people and leave. You don't want to find out what happens if I have to ask again." The words were spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of natural law, as inevitable as gravity. Frank struggled to his feet, still protecting Dolores with one arm while addressing their unexpected defender. "Mr. Tyson, please, we don't want any trouble. We can handle this." But Tyson's attention never wavered from Derek, reading the younger man's body language with the expertise of someone who'd made a science of human destruction. The alcohol made Derek sloppy, but it also made him unpredictable, a dangerous combination when dealing with someone desperate enough to assault elderly strangers. Dolores clutched her husband's arm, terrified but also awestruck at seeing her childhood hero in person. She'd watched his fights on television with Frank throughout the 80s and 90s, marveling at the controlled ferocity that had made him the youngest heavyweight champion in history. Derek began to circle Tyson like a predator stalking prey, his MMA training evident in the fluid way he moved despite consuming nearly half a bottle of whiskey. The size difference was obvious. Derek had 6 inches and 40 pounds on the former champion, but anyone who understood fighting could see the gulf in pure skill. You know what, old man? Derek threw a few shadow punches, showing off for the cameras now recording from every angle. I've always wondered how a boxer would do against a real fighter. All those padded gloves and referees protecting you. Let's see what you've got when it's just fists and fury. The crowd of diners pressed back against the walls, creating an impromptu arena in the center of Murphy's Family Diner. Some filmed with trembling hands while others called friends and family. Knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years, Derek's movements became more aggressive, his circling tighter as he tested Tyson's reactions. The former MMA fighter had legitimate skills. His wrestling background showed in his footwork, his submission training, and the way he evaluated angles and distance. But skill without discipline was just elaborate violence, and Derek had clearly abandoned any pretense of control. "Last chance, son," Tyson said, his voice carrying the patience of someone who'd learned to master his own demons. "These people deserve better than this. Walk away while you still can." Derek's response was a burst of ugly laughter that echoed off the diner's walls. "Walk away?" From Iron Mike Tyson. He spread his arms wide, playing to his audience. "Do you know how long I've dreamed of a moment like this? My whole career, everyone said MMA fighters were tougher than boxers. Tonight, I prove it." The cameras captured every word, every gesture, turning what should have been a simple apology into a viral spectacle. Derek fed off the attention, his ego inflating with each passing second as he imagined the headlines, the interview requests, the endorsement deals that would follow his victory over a legend. Tyson remained perfectly still in the center of the makeshift ring, his hands at his sides, his breathing steady and controlled. To the untrained eye, he looked passive, almost resigned to whatever was coming. But experienced fighters recognized the stance of a coiled spring, compressed and ready to explode. Derek's circles grew tighter, his shadow punches more elaborate. The whiskey had convinced him that size and youth would overcome skill and experience, that this old man was just another stepping stone back to relevance. He had no idea he was about to learn why some legends never fade. With a wild, telegraphed swing that started somewhere near his ankles, Derek launched himself forward, throwing everything he had into one devastating punch aimed at Mike Tyson's head. Time seemed to slow as the blow approached. 40 years of accumulated bitterness and desperation behind it. Derek's haymaker whistled through empty air as Tyson slipped the punch with minimal movement, his head tilting just enough to let the wild swing pass harmlessly by his ear. The motion was so economical, so perfectly timed, that it seemed almost casual, like stepping aside to avoid a puddled eye. In the same fluid motion, 40 years of boxing mastery condensed into one perfect moment of violence. Tyson's legs drove up from the floor, his hips rotated with mechanical precision, and his right fist traveled less than 8 inches to connect with devastating accuracy under Derek's chin. The uppercut was textbook perfection, the same punch that had ended careers and dropped giants throughout Tyson's legendary career. It caught Derek with his weight moving forward, amplifying the impact as physics and skill combined in brutal harmony. Derek's head snapped back like he'd been hit by a wrecking ball. His feet left the ground completely, his massive frame sailing backward through the air with his arms windmilling helplessly. He crashed through an empty table in an explosion of splintering wood, flying plates, and scattered silverware. The diner erupted in gasps and scattered applause. Someone shouted, "Holy shit," while cameras captured every angle of the destruction. Derek lay motionless in the wreckage for several seconds. His eyes rolled back, blood trickling from his split lip where his own teeth had done additional damage. Tyson didn't press his advantage or pose for the cameras. Instead, he immediately turned to Frank and Dolores, concern replacing the cold calculation that had marked his features during the brief confrontation. "Are you folks hurt?" His voice carried genuine warmth, the same tone he might use with his own family. "Did he injure you when he grabbed your wrist, ma'am?" Dolores stared up at him with tears in her eyes, rubbing circulation back into her wrist. "We're fine, thanks to you. I can't believe. Mike Tyson saved us." Frank stood and extended his hand with the dignity of someone who'd worked honestly his entire life. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. What you just did, anyone decent would have done the same thing," Tyson replied, shaking the older man's hand with careful gentleness. "Some lines shouldn't be crossed." Behind them, Derek groaned and began struggling to his feet, using an overturned chair for support. His designer shirt was torn, his face already swelling from the impact, but his pride was damaged worse than his body. The cameras had captured everything: his arrogant challenge, his wild miss, his spectacular defeat at the hands of a man 22 years his senior. Blood ran down Derek's chin as he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, staring at the crimson stain with disbelief. No one had hit him that hard since his professional career ended. Maybe not even then. The punch had been like getting struck by lightning, precise and overwhelming. But Derek's humiliation was just beginning to transform into something far more dangerous. His hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers closing around the familiar weight of his folding knife. If he couldn't beat Tyson with his fists, there were other ways to even the odds. The 4-inch blade clicked open with a practiced flick of his wrist, the steel gleaming under the diner's fluorescent lights. The sound cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a scythe, turning cheers into screams as patrons realized the fight was far from over. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, has been," Derek snarled, raising the knife so everyone could see it. Blood from his split lip gave his words a lisp, but the weapon made his meaning perfectly clear. The game had changed completely. What started as a simple assault had escalated into something potentially deadly. Tyson rose to his full height, his expression hardening as he recognized that the desperate man before him was capable of anything. In the space of 30 seconds, Murphy's Family Diner had been transformed from a place of comfort into a battlefield. And the most dangerous part of the fight was just beginning. The knife gleamed as Derek lunged forward with surprising speed for someone who'd just been knocked unconscious. The blade sliced through the air in a vicious arc aimed at Tyson's midsection, driven by desperation and the liquid courage still coursing through Derek's system. Tyson's boxing footwork saved his life. The same movement that had carried him through decades of professional fights, short, precise steps that kept him balanced and mobile, allowed him to backpedal just out of range. The knife's tip missed his stomach by inches, close enough that he felt the whisper of displaced air, screaming. Patrons dove under tables and rushed toward exits as the diner transformed into a battlefield. Parents grabbed children, elderly couples helped each other toward the kitchen door, and Jimmy Murphy shouted for everyone to get back as chairs and tables became obstacles in a deadly dance. Derek's knife work revealed training that went beyond barroom brawling. His grip was professional, his stance suggesting military instruction or prison education. This wasn't random violence. This was practiced lethality wielded by someone who'd clearly used blades before. Tyson grabbed a wooden chair, holding it like a shield while using the diner's layout to his advantage. The narrow space between booths became tactical terrain, forcing Derek to attack from predictable angles. Overturned tables created barriers that broke up Derek's advances, giving Tyson precious seconds to read his opponent's patterns. "You think you're still something special?" Derek snarled, feinting left before slashing right. The blade caught the chair's edge, sending wood chips flying. "You're just another washed-up old man who doesn't know when to quit." The younger man's reach advantage became obvious as he pressed his attack. Derek could strike from distances that kept him safe from Tyson's legendary punching power, turning the fight into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Each slash forced Tyson back another step, hurting him away from the open floor space where his footwork was most effective. Jimmy Murphy shepherded the last terrified customers toward the kitchen exit, his face pale as he watched his peaceful diner become a war zone. Broken glass crunched underfoot, overturned chairs created hazardous footing, and the smell of spilled coffee mixed with the metallic scent of approaching violence. Derek's attacks grew more aggressive as he sensed victory within reach. The alcohol made him sloppy, but also eliminated any remaining inhibitions. This wasn't about winning a fight anymore. This was about permanent solutions to temporary problems. "Come on, champ," Derek taunted, slashing at Tyson's reaching hands. "Show me that legendary power. Let's see what Iron Mike looks like when he bleeds." The taunts revealed Derek's tactical thinking. He was trying to provoke Tyson into abandoning his defensive posture, baiting the former champion into making the kind of aggressive move that would create openings for the knife. It was sound strategy from someone who understood both psychology and violence. Tyson continued his methodical retreat, using chairs and tables to maintain distance while his eyes tracked Derek's footwork. The younger man was herding him toward the back corner of the diner, near the restrooms where the space narrowed and escape routes disappeared. As Derek raised the knife for what looked like a finishing strike, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Police cars were racing toward Murphy's diner, their red and blue lights already visible through the windows. But Derek's smile only widened as he cornered his prey. Help was coming, but it might already be too late. Derek had Tyson backed against the narrow hallway leading to the restrooms, the knife poised for a downward strike that would end the confrontation permanently. The confined space eliminated Tyson's mobility advantage, turning his legendary footwork into a liability in the cramped corridor. But as Derek prepared to deliver what he believed would be the killing blow, movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Frank Castellano was helping his wife toward the kitchen exit, but Dolores's arthritis made their progress painfully slow. They were still dangerously exposed, directly in Derek's line of sight. Derek's cruel smile widened as he spotted the vulnerable elderly couple. "Maybe I should finish what I started with your friends first," he said, shifting his attention toward Frank and Dolores. "Make you watch before I gut you like a fish." The threat triggered something primal in Tyson's protective instincts. Without hesitation, he abandoned his defensive position and threw himself between Derek and the Castellanos, accepting the tactical disadvantage to shield the innocent couple from harm. That Derek's blade caught Tyson across the forearm as the former champion intercepted the attack meant for Frank and Dolores. The steel parted fabric and skin in a shallow but painful cut that sent blood streaming down Tyson's arm and spattering onto the checkered floor. The sacrifice play worked exactly as intended. Tyson's sudden aggression drove Derek backward, away from the vulnerable couple and back into the main dining area, where the former champion could use his superior boxing skills. A lightning-fast combination, left hook to the body, right cross to the head, staggered Derek and bought Frank and Dolores the time they needed to reach safety. "Go," Tyson shouted over his shoulder, never taking his eyes off Derek. "Get to the kitchen." Frank wrapped his arm around Dolores and guided her toward the exit. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude for the man who'd risked his life to protect them. They disappeared through the swinging doors just as Derek recovered his balance and renewed his attack. Blood ran down Tyson's forearm, soaking his white shirt sleeve and dripping steadily onto the floor. The cut wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly knife fights could turn deadly. One slip, one moment of inattention, and the blade would find something vital. Derek sensed his advantage slipping away as the sirens grew louder. Police response time in Queens averaged 8 minutes for violent crimes, and at least 6 had already passed since Jimmy Murphy's call. Whatever he was going to accomplish needed to happen in the next 2 minutes. Before badges and guns shifted the balance of power permanently, desperation made Derek more dangerous but also more reckless. His knife attacks became wilder, more committed, sacrificing technique for aggression. He lunged forward with everything he had. The blade aimed directly at Tyson's heart, but desperation was a poor substitute for skill and experience. Tyson caught Derek's wrist at the exact moment of maximum extension, stopping the knife inches from his chest. For a heartbeat, the two men stood locked in deadly stalemate. Derek's steroid-enhanced strength against Tyson's lifetime of training and iron will. The contest lasted exactly 3 seconds before Tyson's left hook ended it. The punch traveled less than 6 inches but carried all the accumulated power of 4 decades in the ring. It connected with Derek's temple like a sledgehammer hitting a watermelon, sending the younger man crashing into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Derek slumped unconscious as the knife clattered across the floor, spinning to rest under an overturned table. Red and blue lights flashed through the diner's windows as 3 police cars screeched to a halt in the parking lot. Tyson stood in the center of the destroyed diner, blood dripping from his arm onto the debris-covered floor as armed officers burst through the front door with weapons drawn. Everyone on the ground. Hands where we can see them. Detective Maria Santos burst through the diner's front door with her weapon drawn, 15 years of police experience instantly cataloging the destruction before her. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and 2 men standing in the center of what looked like a war zone. Santos was a compact, athletic woman in her early 40s whose Latina heritage and intelligent dark eyes missed nothing. She recognized both men immediately. The unconscious giant slumped against the wall was Derek Kozlov, whose arrest record included assault and steroid possession. The bleeding man in the expensive suit was someone far more complicated to deal with. Mike Tyson. Santos lowered her weapon slightly, though her partner Detective Rodriguez kept his trained on both men. What the hell happened here? Tyson raised his hand slowly, blood from his forearm cut dripping onto the checkered floor. Officer, this man attacked an elderly couple with a knife. I intervened to protect them. Derek stirred as paramedics rushed. In behind the police, his eyes opening to focus groggily on Santos. Even semi-conscious, his survival instincts kicked in immediately. He attacked me. Derek's voice was slurred but urgent. I was just having dinner when this psycho went crazy. You all saw it. He's got a history of violence. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Santos had been a cop long enough to know that first statements often determined how investigations proceeded, and Derek's version painted him as the victim of an unprovoked assault by a man whose past included prison time and public controversies. Ma'am, that's not what happened. Jimmy Murphy emerged from behind the counter, his Irish accent thick with stress. The big fellow there was threatening. An elderly couple grabbed the old lady's wrist. Mr. Tyson tried to stop him, and that's when the knife came out. Santos looked around the destroyed diner, taking in the overturned tables, the scattered debris, and the knife lying under a chair. Her trained eye read the scene like a book, the pattern of furniture damage, the blood spatter, the positioning of the combatants when police arrived. Frank Castellano appeared from the kitchen, supporting Dolores as they approached the officers. Despite their ordeal, both maintained the dignity of people who'd lived through harder times and tougher challenges. Officer, I need to tell you what really happened, Frank said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. That man there, he pointed at Derek. He assaulted us for no reason. Shoved me, grabbed my wife. Mr. Tyson stepped in to help when no one else would. Dolores nodded emphatically, showing the bruises already forming on her wrist where Derek had grabbed her. He was like an animal. If Mr. Tyson hadn't been here. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Santos pulled out her notebook while Rodriguez secured the crime scene. Multiple witnesses confirmed the same story, Derek as the aggressor, Tyson as the reluctant defender. The diner's security camera would provide additional evidence, though Santos could already see how any decent defense attorney might spin the footage. I need medical attention, Derek complained as paramedics examined his injuries. That maniac tried to kill me. I want to press charges for assault with intent to commit murder. Derek's lawyer, Harold Berkowitz, arrived within 20 minutes, a slimy criminal defense attorney who specialized in turning victims into perpetrators and facts into fiction. His expensive suit and practiced concern immediately raised Santos's suspicions about who was paying his fees. My client was the victim of an unprovoked assault by a man with a documented history of violence, Berkowitz announced before anyone asked for his opinion. We demand full prosecution and protective custody until this dangerous individual is properly restrained. Santos had seen enough manipulative criminals to recognize the performance. Derek's story was too polished, too convenient, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed the system would protect him regardless of the truth. The security footage told a different story entirely. Frame by frame, it showed Derek's escalating aggression, his assault on Frank, his threatening of Dolores, and his use of the knife. No amount of legal spin could transform the clear video evidence of who had initiated violence and who had responded to protect the innocent. Derek was formally charged with assault, menacing with a weapon, and reckless endangerment. As he was processed for booking, He made one phone call, not to family or friends, but to a number he knew by heart. "Vinny, it's Derek." His voice was urgent despite the pain medication. "That thing we talked about? I need it now. Tonight went sideways, and I'm going to need serious help to fix this mess." At 2:30 in the morning, Vinny Torino sat in his upscale Manhattan office reviewing Derek's arrest report on his computer screen. The third-generation organized crime figure had adapted traditional mob tactics to modern sports corruption, building an empire through seemingly legitimate fight promotion and athlete management companies. Vinny's office reflected his successful facade: expensive leather furniture, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But the man behind the mahogany desk was calculating how much damage Derek's spectacular failure might cause to operations that had taken years to build. Derek had been Vinny's muscle for 2 years, intimidating fighters into signing unfavorable contracts and occasionally delivering more permanent solutions to problematic athletes. The arrangement worked because Derek needed money and validation, while Vinny needed someone with legitimate fighting credentials to handle delicate situations. The arrest threatened everything. If Derek talked to reduce his sentence, he could expose the entire network of fixed fights, exploited athletes, and corrupt officials that generated millions in illegal betting revenue. Vinny's organization had survived by staying invisible. Derek had made that impossible in the most public way imaginable. Through flashbacks, the scope of Vinny's operation became clear. He scouted desperate, washed-up fighters like Derek, then used them to pressure active athletes into cooperation. Fighters who refused to throw matches or sign exploitative contracts found themselves facing accidents that ended careers or lives. The system was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. Tommy Marcello, Vinny's assistant, entered with disturbing news. "Boss, that thing with Derek, it's everywhere. The whole fight with Tyson got recorded by like 20 people. Social media's exploding with videos." Vinny's whiskey glass shattered against the wall as his careful control finally cracked. "How many fighters know Derek works for us? Maybe 8 or 10 who he's approached directly. But if he starts talking..." Tommy didn't need to finish the sentence. Both men understood the implications of a full federal investigation into their activities. Vinny's phone rang continuously as associates called with damage assessments and contingency plans. The Derek situation had created exposure that threatened not just their current operations, but potentially decades of carefully constructed criminal enterprise. "Get Berkowitz over here now," Vinny ordered, "and call our friends at the bail bond company. Derek gets out tomorrow morning, no matter what it costs." Harold Berkowitz arrived within the hour, his expensive suit rumpled from being awakened in the middle of the night. The defense attorney had handled dozens of cases for Vinny's organization, always managing to find legal loopholes or procedural errors that kept dangerous people on the streets. "The evidence is problematic," Berkowitz admitted after reviewing the security footage. "Multiple witnesses, clear video of Derek initiating violence, and Mike Tyson's reputation as a reformed character. This isn't going away quietly." Vinny leaned back in his leather chair, studying the city lights while his mind processed options. Derek was a liability now, but he was also the key to solving a much larger problem. The arrest had created exposure, but it had also created opportunity. "Here's what we're going to do," Vinny said finally. "Derek gets bailed out, and then he issues a public challenge to Tyson. Make it look like professional rivalry, not criminal activity. The media will eat it up: old boxer versus young MMA fighter, redemption story versus comeback attempt." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of hiding from the publicity, they'd use it to launder Derek's reputation while creating a massive betting opportunity. A sanctioned exhibition match would generate millions in revenue, while making Derek's assault charges look like competitive enthusiasm rather than criminal behavior. "And if Tyson refuses the challenge?" Berkowitz asked. Vinny's smile was cold as winter in Queens. "Then we make sure he understands the consequences of disappointing his fans. Mike Tyson may be a legend, but legends bleed just like everyone else." The meeting ended with specific instructions for each participant. Berkowitz would handle Derek's bail and legal strategy. Tommy would coordinate media manipulation and betting line establishment. And Vinny would personally ensure that Mike Tyson received a message he couldn't ignore. By dawn, Derek would be free and the challenge would be public. Whether Tyson accepted or refused, Vinny's organization would profit from the chaos Derek had created. The only question was how many people would be destroyed in the process. As his associates filed out of the office, Vinny poured another whiskey and stared at the security footage of Derek's humiliating defeat. Soon, very soon, Mike Tyson would learn that legends weren't bulletproof, and neither were the innocent people they tried to protect. Vinny Torino's fingers drummed against his mahogany desk as he reviewed the arrest report for the third time in an hour. The numbers told a story he didn't want to read. Derek Kozlov, assault with a weapon, multiple witnesses, video evidence. 20 years of careful planning, reduced to a drunk bully's temper tantrum in a Queens diner. Vinny had built his empire by staying invisible, operating through legitimate businesses that laundered dirty money and dirtier deeds. Fight promotion, sports betting, talent management. All clean on paper, all serving the same criminal purpose underneath. Derek's spectacular failure had dragged everything into the light. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds. Each light represented someone sleeping peacefully, unaware that men like Vinny shaped their world from shadows. But shadows only worked when no one was looking, and Derek had invited the whole world to watch. Tommy Marcello burst through the office doors without knocking, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running. "Boss, we got problems. Big problems." "I'm aware of Derek's situation," Vinny said coldly. "Berkowitz is handling the legal angles. It's not just the arrest." Tommy's voice cracked with stress. "The fight, the whole thing with Tyson, it's everywhere. YouTube, Twitter, TikTok. 20 different angles, high definition, full audio. Derek threatening old people, getting knocked out, pulling the knife. It's got 15 million views and climbing fast." Vinny's whiskey glass exploded against the wall, sending crystal fragments across the Persian rug. 20 years of careful reputation management, destroyed by smartphone cameras and social media. The Invisible Man had become the most visible criminal in New York. The scope of the disaster became clear as Tommy continued his report. Derek wasn't just Vinny's muscle. He was the connection point between legitimate fight promotion and criminal enforcement. Every fighter Derek had intimidated, every contract he'd enforced through violence, every accident he'd arranged, all of it led back to Vinny's organization. "How many active fighters know Derek works for us?" Vinny asked, already calculating. "Damage control strategies. 8 or 10 directly. But if the feds start digging..." Tommy didn't need to finish. Both men understood how federal investigations worked. Find one thread. Pull until the whole tapestry unraveled. Vinny's phone buzzed with calls from associates, each bringing worse news. The Derek videos were spreading faster than wildfire, complete with amateur detective work identifying connections between the disgraced fighter and Vinny's promotional company. Social media investigators were already asking uncomfortable questions about Derek's financial backing and training facilities. "Get Berkowitz over here," Vinny ordered, "and call our bail bond contact. Derek gets out tomorrow morning, whatever it costs." "Boss, maybe we should cut him loose. Derek's radioactive now. Anyone associated with him." Vinny's stare could have frozen blood. "Derek knows where the bodies are buried, Tommy. Literally. We don't cut him loose, we control him. Or we eliminate the problem permanently." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Derek had created this mess through stupidity and arrogance, but he was also the key to containing it. The right strategy could transform scandal into opportunity, criminal charges into publicity stunts. "Here's what's going to happen," Vinny continued, his voice carrying the cold calculation that had built an empire. "Derek gets bailed out, cleaned up, and media trained. Then he issues a public challenge to Mike Tyson. Make it look like professional rivalry, not criminal activity." Tommy's eyes widened as he grasped the strategy. Transform the assault into athletic competition, criminal charges into pre-fight drama. The media would eat it up, the public would demand the fight, and betting revenue would reach astronomical levels. And if Tyson refuses? Vinny's smile held no warmth whatsoever. Then the legendary Mike Tyson learns that some fights you can't avoid, no matter how much you want peace. The modest Queens apartment building had seen better decades, but it maintained the dignity of working-class pride that defined the neighborhood. Tyson climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, his arms still bandaged from Derek's knife, carrying a small bouquet of flowers he'd picked up from the corner bodega. Frank opened the door before Tyson could knock, his weathered face breaking into a smile that belonged on a proud grandfather. "Michael, come in, come in. Dolores has been cooking all morning. She's convinced you're wasting away." The apartment was small but immaculate, filled with the accumulated treasures of 52 years of marriage. Wedding photos shared space with construction site pictures. Grandchildren's artwork covered the refrigerator, and the smell of homemade sauce filled the air like a blessing. Dolores emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron that read "World's Best Teacher," her silver hair perfectly styled despite spending the morning cooking. She immediately fussed over Tyson's bandaged arm, her maternal instincts activated by his injury. "You sit right here," she ordered, guiding him to Frank's favorite chair. "That cut needs proper attention, and you need proper food. When did you last have a real meal?" Frank chuckled as he watched his wife transform the legendary Mike Tyson into just another person who needed taking care of. "She did the same thing with our construction crews. Fed half of Queens over the years, convinced every worker was too skinny." The walls were covered with Frank's construction photos, crew shots from major projects, groundbreaking ceremonies, the completed structures that had helped build modern New York. One black and white image showed a young Frank standing in front of Madison Square Garden during its construction in the late 60s. "I fought there dozens of times," Tyson said, studying the photograph. "Never knew you helped build it." Frank's chest swelled with pride. "Worked on it for 18 months. Every time I watched your fights on television, I'd tell Dolores, I helped build the house where Iron Mike is throwing thunder." Over coffee and Dolores's legendary meatballs, Tyson found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He told them about his quiet life now, mentoring young fighters at a gym in Brooklyn, raising pigeons in his backyard, reading philosophy and poetry. The simple acceptance in their eyes made confessions feel like conversations. "'Cause used to have friends like you," Tyson said quietly. "Old school people who judged you by your character, not your mistakes. They showed me kindness when the whole world saw only violence." Dolores patted his hand with the gentle authority of someone who'd spent 35 years teaching children. "Everyone deserves kindness, Michael, especially people who've had to fight for everything they ever got." Frank showed him photo albums, their wedding, their children growing up, grandchildren's birthday parties. Normal life, documented in thousands of small moments that added up to something beautiful. It was everything Tyson had missed during his years of fame and controversy. "You know what I learned in construction?" Frank said as they looked through the pictures. "The strongest buildings have the deepest foundations. You can't see them, but they're what holds everything up when the storms come." The afternoon passed peacefully, filled with stories and laughter that felt like family gatherings Tyson had never experienced. Dolores insisted on sending him home with enough food for a week, while Frank made him promise to visit again soon. As Tyson prepared to leave, Frank walked him to the door with the measured steps of someone who'd earned his rest. "You didn't have to help us last night, but you did. That's the mark of a real champion. Someone who fights for others, not just himself." Dolores hugged him at the doorway, whispering words that hit harder than any punch he'd ever taken. "You be careful, Michael. Men like that, Derek, they don't forget easily. And they usually have friends who are worse than they are." Her warning proved prophetic as Tyson reached his car. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice old couple. Be a shame if something happened to them while you're feeling so heroic. We need to talk." The message included a photo that made Tyson's blood run cold. Frank and Dolores leaving their apartment building that morning, completely unaware they were being watched. Someone had been monitoring them, cataloging their movements, preparing leverage for whatever came next. Tyson stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked back at the apartment building where two innocent people had just offered him the kind of family warmth he'd spent a lifetime seeking. The choice ahead was simple and terrible. Ignore the threat and hope it went away, or acknowledge that some fights chose you whether you wanted them or not. His phone buzzed again with an address and a time. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Come alone, or they get hurt." The restaurant looked legitimate from the outside. Red brick facade, small sign reading, "Gino's Traditional Italian." The kind of family establishment that had anchored Little Italy for generations. But Tyson's street instincts recognized the subtle signs that marked it as something else entirely. The overly attentive doorman, the empty tables despite the dinner hour, the way conversations stopped when he entered. Vincent Torino waited in a corner booth, flanked by two men whose expensive suits couldn't disguise their function as bodyguards. Vinny looked like any successful businessman. Perfectly groomed, confident posture, the kind of smile that belonged in corporate boardrooms and charity galas. "Mr. Tyson, thank you for coming." Vinny stood and extended his hand with practiced warmth. "Please sit. Can I order you something? The veal is exceptional here." Tyson remained standing, his dark eyes scanning the restaurant's layout with the tactical awareness of someone who'd survived dangerous places. "Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" Vinny's smile never wavered as he gestured for his guest to sit. "I represent Derek Kozlov's business interests. Professional fight management, career development, that sort of thing. Last night's incident was regrettable. Derek's been having personal problems lately, divorce, financial stress. Sometimes good people make bad choices under pressure." The lie was delivered with practiced sincerity, complete with manufactured concern for Derek's well-being. Vinny painted himself as a legitimate businessman trying to help a troubled athlete, rather than the criminal puppet master who'd been using Derek as an enforcer for years. "He assaulted an elderly couple," Tyson said flatly. "There's no excuse for that." "Absolutely not," Vinny agreed. "Which is why I'm here to make this right. Full restitution for any damages, medical expenses, trauma counseling, whatever it takes. Derek just needs help, not jail time. We'd appreciate your cooperation in encouraging the district attorney to consider rehabilitation over incarceration." Tyson studied the man across from him, reading the calculation behind the concerned facade. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture designed to project reasonableness while concealing the threat underneath. This wasn't negotiation, it was extortion wrapped in expensive clothing. "The answer is no," Tyson said simply. He made his choice when he pulled that knife. Vinny's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could resolve this like civilized people." One of the bodyguards placed a manila envelope on the table, sliding it across the white tablecloth with deliberate precision. Tyson opened it to find high-resolution photographs of Frank and Dolores, leaving their apartment, shopping at the grocery store, having coffee at a neighborhood cafe. "Nice old couple," Vinny said conversationally. "Very predictable routines. Same grocery store every Tuesday, same church every Sunday, same diner every Friday night. People like that, they depend on routine. Makes them feel safe in an unsafe world." The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but its meaning was crystal clear. Frank and Dolores were being watched, cataloged, prepared as leverage against Tyson's conscience. "You're making a mistake," Tyson said, his voice carrying the controlled menace that had once terrorized heavyweight champions. "Am I?" Vinny leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed by the legendary fighter's presence. "Here's what's going to happen. Derek is going to be released on bail tomorrow morning, and he's going to issue a public challenge for an exhibition match. You're going to accept, fight him in a sanctioned bout, and everyone wins. Derek gets his reputation back. You get to play the gracious legend, and I get to promote the fight of the century." The plan was elegant in its simplicity: transform criminal charges into promotional opportunities, assault into athletic competition. The media would eat it up, the public would demand tickets, and betting revenue would reach astronomical levels. "And if I refuse?" Vinny's smile held all the warmth of a shark studying wounded prey. "Then Frank and Dolores Castellano will discover that Queens isn't as safe as they thought. Accidents happen to elderly people all the time, slip and fall. Incidents, home invasions gone wrong, medical emergencies that couldn't be prevented." The photographs showed Frank and Dolores in dozens of vulnerable moments, unlocking their apartment door, walking alone at night, sitting peacefully in their favorite diner booth. Each image was a promise of violence, a catalog of opportunities for the kind of accidents that would destroy Tyson's soul. "You have 24 hours to decide," Vinny concluded, signaling for the check. "Derek's press conference is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I suggest you watch it carefully and consider your options." As Tyson left the restaurant, the weight of impossible choices settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. accept the challenge and legitimize criminal behavior, or refuse and watch innocent people suffer for his principles. Either way, Vincent Torino would profit from the chaos he'd created. The photographs burned in Tyson's jacket pocket as he drove through Queens, past the apartment building where two decent people slept peacefully, unaware that their kindness had made them targets in a war they never asked to join. The courthouse steps buzzed with media activity as Derek Kozlov emerged from the building a free man, flanked by his attorney Harold Berkowitz and a well-dressed man introduced as his manager and promoter. Despite his bruised face and the indignity of spending a night in jail, Derek projected confidence that seemed almost supernatural after his humiliating defeat. Vincent Torino had worked his magic overnight, $20,000 in bail money, a media consultant to coach Derek's talking points, and a narrative that transformed criminal assault into competitive rivalry. The disgraced MMA fighter had been repackaged as an underdog seeking redemption against an aging legend. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek began, reading from carefully prepared notes. Last night's incident at Murphy's Diner was a misunderstanding between two warriors who let competitive spirit get the better of judgment. Mike Tyson and I both lost our tempers, and innocent people got caught in the crossfire. The reframing was masterful. Derek positioned himself as an equal participant in mutual combat rather than a criminal who'd assaulted elderly civilians. The knife, the threats, the terrorizing of Frank and Dolores, all of it disappeared behind language designed to minimize and deflect. However, Derek continued, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his performance. I believe there's an opportunity here to settle our differences in the proper venue. Therefore, I'm issuing a formal challenge to Mike Tyson for a sanctioned exhibition match. Let's finish what we started, but do it right this time. The press conference exploded with questions. Sports reporters who'd been following Derek's career pressed for details about training, strategy, and odds. Crime beat journalists asked about the assault charges and whether the fight would proceed if he was convicted. Entertainment media wanted to know about pay-per-view rights and celebrity endorsements. Derek handled every query with coach precision, painting himself as a reformed athlete seeking legitimate competition rather than a violent criminal trying to buy his way out of consequences. Vinny stood beside him like a proud father, projecting the image of successful sports management rather than organized crime leadership. This isn't about money or revenge, Derek concluded. This is about respect. Mike Tyson is a legend, and legends deserve to be challenged by the best. I may have made mistakes in my personal life, but I'm still one of the most dangerous fighters on the planet. It's time to prove it. Within hours, the challenge had exploded across social media platforms. Hashtag Tyson vs. Kozlov began trending worldwide as fight fans debated the merits of an aging boxing legend facing a younger, stronger MMA competitor. ESPN picked up the story for their evening broadcast, while TMZ promised exclusive behind-the-scenes coverage. The narrative warfare was swift and brutal. Derek's supporters painted him as a hungry underdog trying to make amends through legitimate competition. Tyson's fans defended their hero's reputation while questioning whether he should risk his legacy against a steroid-enhanced opponent 22 years younger. Missing from most coverage was any meaningful discussion of Frank and Dolores Castellano, the actual victims of Derek's violence. Their suffering was reduced to background color in a story about athletic competition and redemption narratives. The media machine had transformed assault into entertainment. Tyson watched the press conference from his home, his jaw tightening, as Derek's performance erased the reality of what had happened in Murphy's Diner. The young couple terrified in their booth. Dolores's whimpered plea as Derek grabbed her wrist. Frank's dignity under attack. All of it disappeared behind sports metaphors and promotional language. His phone rang constantly with reporters, promoters, and former associates wanting statements, predictions, and insider information. Tyson let them all go to voicemail, knowing that anything he said would be twisted to serve someone else's agenda. The final straw came when a news van parked outside Frank and Dolores's apartment building, its satellite dish extended like a weapon aimed at their privacy. The elderly couple who'd offered him family warmth were now being stalked by media vultures seeking any angle that might generate clicks and ratings. Tyson stared at the live television coverage of reporters knocking on his friend's door, demanding statements about their relationship with the boxing legend. and their thoughts on the upcoming super fight. Frank and Dolores had become props in someone else's story, their dignity sacrificed to feed the entertainment machine. The manipulation was perfect in its cynicism. Accept the fight and legitimize Derek's assault as competitive spirit, or refuse. And watch innocent people suffer for his principles. Either choice served Vinny's interests while destroying something precious in the process. Tyson picked up his phone and dialed Derek's number, knowing the conversation would be recorded and analyzed by people whose only interest was profit. When Derek answered, his voice carried the cocky confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. "I accept your challenge," Tyson said simply, then hung up before Derek could respond. The words would be headlines within minutes, but Tyson wasn't thinking about media coverage or public perception. He was thinking about Frank and Dolores Castellano, and the promise he'd made to himself that some people were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. 2 weeks before the scheduled fight, Mickey's gym in Brooklyn buzzed with an energy that hadn't been felt since the glory days of the sport. Word had spread through the boxing underground that Mike Tyson was training seriously again, and fighters, trainers, and curious onlookers gathered to witness something they'd thought they'd never see. The gym itself was a temple to boxing's golden age. Heavy bags hanging from chains that had supported legends, speed bags worn smooth by countless hours of punishment, and rings where championships had been won and lost. The smell of leather, sweat, and liniment created an atmosphere that transported visitors back to when boxing was America's sport. Eddie Morales, Tyson's trainer for this comeback, watched his fighter work the heavy bag with combinations that still carried devastating power. At 63, Eddie had trained 3 world champions and seen every type of athlete imaginable, but Tyson remained unique. A perfect storm of natural ability, learned technique, and controlled violence. "Your power's still there," Eddie observed as Tyson's hooks made the 200-pound bag dance like a toy. "But that boy's got 22 years on you. This ain't about proving anything to anybody. It's about surviving long enough to get the job done." Tyson nodded between combinations, his breathing controlled despite the intensity of his workout. The years had added wisdom to his natural gifts, teaching him to conserve energy while maximizing impact. He couldn't fight like a 20-year-old anymore, but he didn't need to. Experience had taught him better ways to hurt people. Young fighters gathered around the ring during sparring sessions, studying Tyson's footwork and head movement with the reverence of music students watching Mozart. Even at 57, his defensive instincts remained sharp enough to make opponents miss by millimeters, turning their aggression into empty air. Frank and Dolores arrived during the second week of training, carrying a cooler filled with homemade sandwiches and the kind of maternal concern that couldn't be bought with any amount of money. Dolores immediately began fussing over Tyson's nutrition, while Frank engaged Eddie in technical discussions about strategy and conditioning. "You don't have to do this for us," Frank said quietly as they watched Tyson work the speed bag. "Dolores and we've lived our lives. We don't want you getting hurt because of our problems." But Tyson's response carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Some fights choose you, Frank. This one chose me the moment that animal put his hands on Dolores. I'm not walking away from that." As the training session wound down, Eddie pulled Tyson aside to review video footage of Derek's recent fights. What they saw was troubling. Derek's muscle mass had increased significantly since his steroid suspension ended. His strength seemed superhuman, and his endurance defied normal human limitations. "He's juicing again," Eddie said bluntly. "Look at his shoulders, his neck. That's not natural muscle development, and it sure isn't from 2 weeks of training. He's on something heavy, probably multiple compounds." The implications were serious. Enhanced strength and endurance gave Derek advantages that skill alone might not overcome, especially against an older opponent. Worse, steroid users often exhibited unpredictable aggression and pain tolerance that made them dangerous even when losing. "Doesn't matter," Tyson said, studying Derek's technique with clinical detachment. "Chemistry can't teach you how to fight, and it can't give you heart. When the pressure comes, we'll see what he's really made of." Frank offered insights from his construction days about dealing with Derek's personality type: bullies who folded when their victims fought back, men whose aggression masked fundamental cowardice. His blue-collar wisdom proved surprisingly applicable to combat psychology. "Guys like that, they're used to people backing down," Frank explained. When someone stands up to them, really stands up, they don't know how to handle it. That's when they make mistakes. As the session ended and the gym began to empty, Tyson felt the familiar pre-fight focus settling over him like armor. The next 2 weeks would determine whether age and wisdom could triumph over youth and chemical enhancement, whether justice could be delivered through violence that served a righteous purpose. Looking at Frank and Dolores as they packed up their cooler and prepared to leave, Tyson knew the answer. Some people were worth fighting for, no matter the odds or the cost. Derek Kozlov was about to learn what happened when you threatened family. Detective Maria Santos sat in her unmarked police car outside Derek Kozlov's apartment building at 6 in the morning, watching the routine that had become as predictable as sunrise. Every day for the past week, Derek emerged at exactly 6:15 a.m., gym bag slung over his massive shoulder, heading to a private training facility in an industrial section of Queens, despite pressure from her superiors to focus on more pressing cases. Santos couldn't shake the feeling that Derek's assault on the elderly couple was part of something larger. 15 years of police work had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct screamed that Derek Kozlov was more than just a washed-up fighter with anger management issues. The training facility itself raised red flags: a converted warehouse with no signage, tinted windows, and the kind of security cameras usually reserved for high-value targets. The business license listed Vincent Torino as the owner, though public records showed no connection between Torino and legitimate sports management. Santos had been quietly investigating Torino's organization for months, following a pattern of suspicious accidents involving young fighters who'd refused certain contract offers. 3 promising athletes had suffered career-ending injuries in training accidents after declining representation from Torino Sports Management. The odds of such coincidences were astronomically small. Her partner, Detective Rodriguez, thought she was chasing shadows. Santos, the guy's a scumbag who beat up old people. Sometimes a piece of shit is just a piece of shit, not part of some grand conspiracy. But Santos had learned to read between the lines of police reports and medical records. The injured fighters all shared common elements: promising careers derailed by freak accidents, financial pressures that made them vulnerable to exploitation, and connections to gyms or promoters linked to Torino's network. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jimmy Murphy called her direct line, his Irish accent thick with concern about strange men asking questions about Mike Tyson in his neighborhood. 3 different people had approached Murphy's regular customers, offering money for information about Tyson's habits, his relationships, his vulnerabilities. They weren't reporters, Jimmy insisted. Reporters ask questions about fights and training. These guys wanted to know where he lives, who he cares about, what would hurt him most. That's not journalism. That's reconnaissance. Santos began connecting dots that painted a disturbing picture. Derek's arrest had created publicity that threatened Torino's organization, but it had also created an opportunity to eliminate a threat while generating massive profits through illegal betting. The exhibition match wasn't about athletic competition. It was about permanently silencing someone who could expose their operation. Frank Castellano's construction background proved invaluable when Santos asked him to review building permits for the fight venue. His weathered hands traced architectural drawings with the expertise of someone who'd spent 50 years understanding structural modifications. "These aren't standard renovations," Frank said, pointing to several recent changes. "Hidden compartments built into the support columns, electrical work that doesn't match any legitimate purpose. Someone's prepared hiding places throughout this building." The modifications suggested prepositioned weapons or equipment, turning what should have been a neutral venue into a trap designed specifically for Mike Tyson. Santos realized they weren't just dealing with fight promotion. They were looking at planned murder disguised as entertainment. Her investigation revealed the full scope of Torino's operation. Young fighters desperate for opportunities were approached with contract offers that seemed generous until the fine print revealed exploitative terms. Those who refused found themselves facing accidents that ended careers or lives, while those who accepted became part of a network that fixed matches and laundered money. Derek had been Torino's primary enforcer for 2 years, using his legitimate fighting background to intimidate athletes into compliance. His arrest threatened to expose everything. But his challenge to Tyson offered a perfect solution: eliminate the threat while generating millions in betting revenue. Santos knew she had enough evidence to begin building a case, but not enough to prevent whatever Torino was planning for fight night. The exhibition match was scheduled for the following week, and every instinct told her that Mike Tyson was walking into a trap that could cost him his life. She needed allies, and she needed them fast. The phone call to Jimmy Murphy was just the beginning. If they were going to save Tyson and expose Torino's organization, they'd need help from people who understood that some fights were worth having, regardless of the odds. The clock was ticking, and Santos could feel the weight of innocent lives hanging in the balance. Derek Kozlov's assault on two elderly people had opened a door into a criminal world that preyed on the desperate and destroyed the brave. Now it was time to kick that door down completely. The meeting convened at Murphy's diner after closing time. The familiar space transformed into a war room where unlikely allies gathered to prevent a catastrophe. Detective Santos sat across from Mike Tyson, Frank and Dolores Castellano flanking them like bookends of moral authority. While Jimmy Murphy served coffee and provided local intelligence, Santos spread photographs and documents across the table, surveillance shots of Derek's training facility, building permits showing suspicious modifications to the fight venue, financial records linking Vincent Torino to a network of shell companies and criminal enterprises. "This isn't just about the exhibition match," Santos explained, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years investigating organized crime. "Torino's been using Derek to intimidate fighters for 2 years. Your arrest of Derek threatened to expose everything. So now they're planning to eliminate you while making millions in betting revenue." Tyson studied the evidence with the same clinical detachment he'd once applied to studying opponents. The scope of Torino's operation was impressive in its criminal efficiency. Legitimate businesses hiding illegal activities, desperate athletes transformed into unwilling participants, violence disguised as sporting competition. "They've modified the fight venue," Frank said, pointing to architectural drawings with the expertise of someone who'd spent 50 years in construction. Hidden compartments built into support columns, electrical systems that don't match any legitimate purpose. Someone's prepared weapons caches throughout that building. Dolores placed a gentle hand on Tyson's arm, her brown eyes filled with the same maternal concern she'd shown countless students over 3 decades of teaching. "Michael, you don't have to do this. We can disappear, move somewhere they'll never find us. Frank and I have had our lives. We don't want yours destroyed because of us." But Tyson's response carried the quiet authority of someone who'd made peace with necessary violence. Running won't stop them from hurting other people. How many fighters has Derek intimidated? How many careers has Torino destroyed? This ends now, or it never ends. Santos outlined their counter-strategy. She'd coordinate with honest officials to monitor the fight, positioning federal agents throughout the venue to document any criminal activity. Jimmy Murphy would use his neighborhood connections to gather intelligence about Torino's associates and their movements. Frank's construction experience proved invaluable for understanding the venue's modifications. His weathered hands traced, building plans with the precision of someone who'd supervised major projects, identifying every hidden compartment and suspicious alteration. "They've prepared multiple weapon caches," Frank explained, "but they had to follow building codes to avoid suspicion. Every hiding place has specific access points and structural limitations. If we know where to look, we can neutralize their advantages." The plan required perfect timing and absolute trust. Santos would ensure that planted weapons were replaced with harmless replicas, while Frank's construction contacts would help map the venue's hidden modifications. Jimmy would coordinate neighborhood watch groups to monitor Torino's associates and report suspicious activity. As they finalized details, Tyson's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered on speaker, allowing everyone to hear Derek's voice slurred with chemical enhancement and liquid courage. "Enjoying your last few days as a legend, old man." Derek's words carried the artificial confidence of someone whose strength came from a needle rather than natural ability. "Tomorrow night, I'm going to destroy you in front of the whole world. And after that, your elderly friends are going to learn what happens to people who cross Vincent Torino." The threat was delivered with casual cruelty, confirming everything Santos had discovered about Torino's organization. Derek wasn't just planning to win a fight. He was planning to send a message that would terrorize anyone considering opposition to their criminal empire. "You made one mistake, Derek," Tyson replied, his voice carrying the calm menace that had once reduced heavyweight champions to quivering children. "You threatened family. That's a line you never cross with someone like me." The call ended with Derek's drunken laughter, but the sound carried less confidence than his words suggested. Santos recognized the pattern of criminals who'd backed themselves into corners, dangerous because they had nothing to lose, but also vulnerable because desperation bred mistakes. As the meeting broke up, each participant understood their role. In the approaching confrontation, Santos would handle law enforcement coordination, Frank would manage venue intelligence, Jimmy would oversee neighborhood security, and Dolores would serve as the moral center that reminded everyone why they were fighting. Tyson walked Frank and Dolores to their car, his protective instincts activated by the direct threat to their safety. Tomorrow night would determine whether justice could triumph over corruption, whether age and wisdom could defeat youth and chemical enhancement. "You be careful tomorrow, Michael," Dolores whispered as she hugged him goodbye. "Some victories aren't worth the price they cost." But Tyson's response carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Some prices are worth paying, Dolores, especially when good people are counting on you to pay them." The Queens Community Center had been transformed into a boxing cathedral, complete with professional lighting, television cameras, and the electric atmosphere that only meaningful fights could generate. 3,000 spectators packed the venue, their anticipation palpable as the biggest upset opportunity in combat sports history prepared to unfold. Derek Kozlov made his entrance like a conquering warrior, his massive frame even more imposing under the harsh television lights. The steroid enhancement was obvious to anyone who understood human physiology. His shoulders had gained impossible mass, his neck was thick as a tree trunk, and his movements carried the superhuman fluidity of chemical augmentation. The crowd's reaction split along generational lines. Younger fans cheered for Derek as the hungry underdog seeking to topple an aging legend, while older spectators remembered when Mike Tyson had been the most feared man on the planet. The betting odds heavily favored the younger, stronger Derek, though underground bookmakers reported unusual action on both sides. Vincent Torino sat ringside in an expensive suit, projecting the image of successful sports promotion while coordinating the criminal enterprise that would climax with Tyson's destruction. His associates were positioned throughout the venue, ready to execute whatever plan required Tyson's permanent silence. Detective Santos monitored everything from the press section, her trained eye cataloging potential threats while maintaining radio contact with federal agents positioned as security personnel. The venue's hidden modifications had been mapped and neutralized, but she knew that men like Torino always had backup plans. Mike Tyson's entrance carried the quiet dignity of true greatness. At 57, he looked every one of his years, but he moved with the controlled precision of someone whose skills had been honed through 4 decades of professional violence. The crowd's roar was deafening as he climbed through the ropes, acknowledging their support with a slight nod. Frank and Dolores sat in the front row, their presence serving as both inspiration and reminder of what this fight truly represented. They weren't just witnesses to athletic competition. They were symbols of everything decent that needed protection from predators like Derek and Torino. The opening bell launched Derek into immediate aggression, his chemically enhanced speed and strength creating problems that Tyson hadn't faced in decades. Combinations that should have been telegraphed came faster than expected, powered by artificial enhancements that made Derek dangerous beyond his natural abilities. Tyson absorbed punishment while studying his opponent's patterns, using his legendary defensive skills to avoid the worst damage while gathering intelligence about Derek's enhanced capabilities. The steroid effects were obvious: superhuman strength, impossible endurance, and the kind of pain tolerance that came from chemical interference with natural warning systems. The first round belonged to Derek, his youth and enhancement overwhelming Tyson's attempts to establish rhythm. The crowd sensed potential upset as the former champion struggled to adapt to an opponent who moved faster and hit harder than physics should have allowed. Round 2 continued Derek's dominance as his combinations found their mark with increasing frequency. Tyson's face began to show damage, a cut over his left eye, swelling along his cheekbone, The accumulated wear of facing someone whose capabilities exceeded normal human limitations. By the end of round 3, Derek's confidence had reached dangerous levels. The scorecards heavily favored the younger fighter, and even Tyson's most loyal supporters began to worry that age and wisdom might not be enough against chemical-enhanced youth and strength. But as Derek returned to his corner, he made a subtle gesture to someone in the crowd, a prearranged signal that the real plan was about to begin. The fight had served its purpose as entertainment and distraction. Now came the part that would eliminate Mike Tyson permanently while providing perfect cover for murder. Hidden weapons were being moved into position around the ring, while Torino's associates prepared to claim self-defense after Derek used concealed tools to finish what steroids had started. The exhibition match was about to become an execution, broadcast live to millions of witnesses who would never know they'd watched a legend die in his corner. Tyson caught sight of the signal and understood that everything was about to change. The real fight was just beginning. Round 4 began with Derek displaying reckless aggression that seemed tactical rather than emotional. Instead of pressing his advantage through normal boxing combinations, he began maneuvering Tyson towards specific areas of the ring, hurting the former champion like a predator positioning prey for the killing blow. Tyson's defensive instincts, honed through 4 decades of professional violence, recognized the pattern immediately. Derek wasn't trying to win a boxing match anymore. He was positioning for something else entirely. The younger fighter's movements became increasingly obvious as he forced action toward the northeast corner where shadows from the overhead lighting created convenient concealment. Detective Santos watched from the press section as Derek's tactics shifted from athletic competition to something far more sinister. Her radio crackled with reports from federal agents positioned throughout the venue, confirming that Torino's associates were moving into predetermined positions around the ring. "Something's wrong," Santos whispered into her microphone. "Derek's not fighting to win anymore. He's setting up for something else." The moment came in the middle of round 4. Derek broke away from a clinch and dove toward the corner post where a suspicious bulge had been concealed beneath the ring apron. His massive hand reached for what should have been a concealed weapon, likely the same type of knife he'd used in Murphy's diner. But instead of cold steel, Derek's fingers found only rubber. The shocked expression on his face told everyone watching that his deadly plan had just collapsed. He stared at the harmless training knife in his hand, his chemical-enhanced mind struggling to process how his perfect trap had become useless theater. "Looking for this?" Tyson's voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent arena as he held up the real knife, the actual weapon that Detective Santos had intercepted and passed to him between rounds through Frank's construction worker contacts, who'd been positioned as venue staff. The crowd gasped as Derek's true intentions became undeniably clear. This wasn't athletic competition. It was attempted murder disguised as sporting entertainment. The cameras captured every detail of Derek's shocked face, his desperate grab for the weapon, and his obvious intent to use lethal force against an opponent who'd been fighting by boxing rules. Vincent Torino's face went ashen as he realized his carefully orchestrated plan had been completely compromised. Federal agents were already moving through the crowd, their positions revealing that law enforcement had been monitoring the entire operation from the beginning. That Derek's desperation reached critical mass as he understood that everything, his reputation, his freedom, his life, was collapsing around him in front of 3,000 witnesses and millions of television viewers. The steroid enhancement that had given him superhuman strength now became a liability as chemical-induced rage overwhelmed any remaining judgment. "You ruined everything," Derek screamed, abandoning all pretense of legitimate competition. "My career, my life, my future, all because of you and those worthless old people." The words confirmed what everyone now understood. This had never been about athletic rivalry or professional competition. Derek and his criminal associates had planned to murder Mike Tyson in front of the largest possible audience, using the exhibition match as cover for assassination. Frank and Dolores sat in the front row, their faces showing the kind of quiet satisfaction that came from seeing justice prepare to assert itself. The elderly couple who'd been terrorized in a Queen's diner were about to watch their protector deliver consequences that would be remembered for generations. Tyson discarded the knife, letting it clatter harmlessly to the canvas as he faced Derek. With the cold calculation of someone whose patience had finally reached its limit, the real fight was about to begin, and this time there would be no chemical enhancement strong enough to save Derek from the legendary fury he was about to unleash. "Your move," Tyson said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of violence that had once terrorized the heavyweight division. With Derek's murderous intentions exposed and his weapons neutralized, Mike Tyson stopped fighting like a 57-year-old man trying to prove he still belonged in the ring. Instead, he began fighting like Iron Mike Tyson at the height of his devastating power, the man who had terrorized heavyweight boxing for over a decade. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Tyson's stance shifted from defensive survival to predatory aggression, his footwork becoming the fluid poetry of violence that had made him the youngest heavyweight champion in history. The years melted away as muscle memory and killing instinct merged into something beautiful and terrible. Derek's steroid-enhanced advantages crumbled against technical mastery refined through 40 years of professional violence. His chemical strength meant nothing when Tyson's combinations landed with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters and pressure points that no amount of artificial enhancement could protect. The first true exchange lasted 3 seconds and changed everything. Derek threw a wild haymaker powered by pharmaceutical fury, but Tyson slipped it with minimal movement and countered with a left hook to the liver that folded the younger man like a broken chair. The sound of impact echoed through the arena like a gunshot that Derek's enhanced pain tolerance, artificially elevated by chemical intervention, couldn't mask the reality of what was happening to his body. Each of Tyson's punches carried decades of accumulated knowledge about how to hurt human beings efficiently and permanently. This wasn't athletics. This was applied violence at its most refined level. You wanted to see what a real fighter looks like. Tyson's voice was conversational as he stalked Derek around the ring. "You threatened an old man and woman because you thought it made you tough? Let me show you what tough really means." Derek attempted every illegal technique from his MMA background: eye gouges, groin strikes, anything that might level the playing field against someone whose skills transcended normal human capability. But Tyson's street fighting experience, learned in the hardest schools of Brooklyn and refined in professional competition, adapted to every desperate attack. Each of Derek's illegal moves only created openings for devastating counters. An attempted eye gouge became an opportunity for an uppercut that lifted Derek off his feet. A groin strike was countered by a right cross that broke Derek's nose with the sound of splintering cardboard. The steroid-enhanced bully was being systematically destroyed by someone who understood violence at a cellular level. The crowd's roar was deafening as justice asserted itself through pure physical dominance. Every parent who'd ever worried about their children being bullied, every elderly person who'd ever felt vulnerable to younger predators, every decent human being who'd ever wondered if good could still triumph over evil, all of them were watching their answer unfold in real time. Derek's movements became increasingly desperate as his enhanced endurance couldn't compensate for the accumulated damage. His left eye was swollen shut, his nose streamed blood, and his ribs showed the purple evidence of liver shots that would ache for months. The chemical enhancement that had made him feel invincible was proving useless against someone who fought with both science and fury. Frank and Dolores sat in the front row with tears streaming down their faces, watching their protector deliver justice with the same methodical precision Frank had once applied to construction projects. Every punch carried meaning. This one for grabbing Dolores's wrist, that one for threatening Frank, another for pulling a knife on innocent people. Vincent Torino tried to signal his associates to intervene, but federal agents were already moving to arrest everyone connected to the criminal conspiracy. The exhibition match had become a federal crime scene, with every moment being recorded as evidence of attempted murder and organized criminal activity. Derek's legs began to betray him, as the accumulated punishment overwhelmed even his chemically enhanced constitution. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling for balance, as Tyson stalked him with the patient inevitability of natural law asserting itself. The end came with perfect symbolic justice. The same uppercut that had floored Derek in Murphy's Diner delivered. With 4 decades of accumulated mastery and righteous anger, Derek's feet left the canvas completely as his unconscious body sailed backward, crashing to the mat with the finality of a closing book. The referee's count was unnecessary. Derek Kozlov lay motionless on the canvas. His criminal ambitions ended by someone who understood that true strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Derek's unconscious form was loaded onto a stretcher. Detective Maria Santos led a coordinated arrest operation that had been months in the planning. Federal agents moved through the arena with the precision of a military operation, taking Vincent Torino and his associates into custody while the crowd watched. Justice unfold in real time. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Security cameras had captured Derek's attempt to access hidden weapons. Multiple witnesses had recorded his criminal confession, and the venue modifications provided physical proof of premeditated murder conspiracy. Torino's carefully built criminal empire was collapsing in front of 3,000 witnesses and millions of television viewers. Vincent Torino, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise, Santos announced as federal agents cuffed the crime boss. His expensive suit and corporate facade couldn't hide the reality that his organization had been completely exposed. The media narrative shifted instantly from sports entertainment to criminal investigation. What had been promoted as athletic competition was revealed as attempted assassination, while Derek's redemption story became evidence of systematic corruption and violence. The fight that was supposed to restore Derek's reputation had instead destroyed it permanently. Harold Berkowitz, Derek's attorney, found himself facing federal charges as investigators revealed his role in laundering criminal proceeds and facilitating violent crimes. The entire network of corrupt officials, compromised athletes, and criminal associates began unraveling as evidence mounted and participants sought plea agreements. Derek regained consciousness in a federal holding cell, his steroid-enhanced body unable to mask the reality of his situation. Additional charges of attempted murder with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit violence, and violation of supervised release meant he was facing decades in federal prison. The exhibition match had become the final chapter of his criminal career. The young fighters who'd been intimidated and exploited by Torino's organization began coming forward with testimonies that painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse. Promising athletes had been forced to throw fights, sign exploitative contracts, or suffer accidents that ended careers and sometimes lives. Marcus Kozlov, Derek's younger brother, watched the arrest from his college dormitory with a mixture of relief and sadness. For years, he'd watched Derek's descent into violence and crime, powerless to intervene. Now, finally, his brother would face consequences that might force the kind of self-examination that could lead to genuine redemption. Maybe this will save him, Marcus told the reporter who tracked him down for comment. Derek lost his way when the steroids and the anger took over. Prison might be the only thing that can help him find himself again. The federal investigation revealed the full scope of Torino's criminal enterprise. Over 30 fighters had been victimized through intimidation, exploitation, or violence. Millions of dollars in illegal betting proceeds had been laundered through legitimate businesses. The corruption extended into regulatory agencies, athletic commissions, and law enforcement organizations. Frank and Dolores sat in the front row throughout the arrests, their presence serving as a reminder of why the investigation had been necessary. The elderly couple who'd simply wanted to enjoy dinner at their favorite restaurant had become symbols of everyone who'd been victimized by predators who mistook kindness for weakness. Mike Tyson stood in the center of the ring as the arena emptied. His victory complete, but bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the cost had been high. Months of training, the risk of serious injury, and the emotional toll of fighting men who represented everything ugly about competitive sports and organized crime. Detective Santos approached Tyson as the last of the criminals were led away in handcuffs. "You did the right thing," she said simply. Torino's organization would have kept destroying lives if someone hadn't stood up to them. The fight purse, substantial despite the exhibition nature of the match, was donated entirely to organizations that helped at-risk youth and supported victims of violent crimes. Tyson's victory had been about justice, not money, and the financial benefits went to people who could use them to build better lives. As the arena lights dimmed and the crowd Dispersed, Frank and Dolores made their way to the ring where their protector waited. The three people who'd been brought together by violence had become family through courage, loyalty, and the shared understanding that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the personal cost. "You did it, champ," Frank said, shaking Tyson's hand with the firm grip of someone who'd worked with his hands his entire life. "You showed them that good people still fight back when pushed too far." Dolores hugged him with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd spent decades caring for children who needed guidance and support. "We're so proud of you, Michael. You fought for all the right reasons." The words meant more to Tyson than any championship belt or media acclaim ever could. He'd found something more valuable than victory. He'd found family, purpose, and the knowledge that his strength could serve something greater than personal glory. 3 months later, Murphy's Family Diner had returned to its role as a neighborhood institution, though the famous booth where everything started now bore a small plaque reading, "Heroes Welcome Here." The Friday night dinner crowd included the usual working families, elderly couples, and young people discovering that some traditions were worth preserving. Frank and Dolores sat in their usual booth, but they were no longer alone. Mike Tyson had joined them for what had become their weekly tradition, along with Detective Maria Santos, who'd been promoted to lieutenant for her work dismantling Torino's organization, and Jimmy Murphy, who closed the diner to the public. For these family gatherings, the conversation revealed the positive changes that had followed the fight and subsequent investigations. Derek was serving 5 years for assault and attempted murder, but he'd begun participating in prison counseling programs that suggested genuine desire for rehabilitation. Vincent Torino had received 20 years for racketeering and conspiracy, while his criminal organization was completely dismantled. "The gym's doing well," Tyson reported, cutting into Dolores's famous meatloaf. "We've got 30 kids training now, all of them learning that fighting means protecting people, not hurting them." Frank's been helping with construction on the new facility. Frank's weathered face showed the pride of someone whose skills remained valuable despite retirement. "These young fighters, they remind me of my construction crews. Give them purpose and direction, and they'll build something beautiful." Detective Santos shared updates from her investigation. The young fighters who'd been victimized by Torino's organization were rebuilding their careers with honest managers and legitimate opportunities. The corruption that had infected multiple athletic commissions was being rooted out through federal oversight and new regulations. 3 more crime families have been indicted based on evidence we found in Torino's files, Santos said. "The whole house of cards is coming down because you were willing to stand up when it mattered." Jimmy Murphy served coffee and pie with the satisfaction of someone whose establishment had become a symbol of standing up to bullies. The diner's business had increased dramatically after the story became public, but the quality and character remained unchanged. Honest food served to decent people in a place where everyone was treated with respect. As dinner wound down, a young man approached their table with obvious nervousness. Marcus Kozlov, Derek's younger brother, was now a junior at Queens College studying social work, determined to help troubled youth avoid the path his brother had chosen. "Mr. Tyson, I wanted to thank you," Marcus said, his voice carrying the sincerity of someone who'd learned hard lessons about choices and consequences. "What you did, stopping Derek before he hurt more people, maybe it saved his life too. He's getting help now, real help. Maybe when he gets out, he can become someone worth respecting again." Tyson stood and shook the young man's hand with the same respect he'd shown Frank and Dolores from the beginning. "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, son. The question is what we do with those chances when we get them." Marcus nodded and walked away, carrying himself with the dignity of someone who'd chosen a different path than family tradition suggested. His presence served as proof that cycles of violence could be broken through individual choice and community support. Frank raised his coffee cup in a toast that had become their weekly ritual. "To real champions, the ones who fight for others, not themselves." The group joined the toast, their voices blending in the warm atmosphere of Murphy's Family Diner. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the Queen's evening, advertising honest food and genuine community in a world that sometimes forgot the value of both. As they prepared to leave, Tyson walked Frank and Dolores to their car with the same protective attention he'd shown since that first night of violence. The elderly couple who'd been terrorized by a bully had become the family he'd spent a lifetime seeking, proving that sometimes the most important victories happened outside any ring. Same time next week, Dolores asked as Frank helped her into the passenger seat. Wouldn't miss it, Tyson replied, meaning every word. Family dinner is the most important appointment I've got. As the Honda Accord pulled away from Murphy's family diner, Tyson stood in the parking lot watching until their taillights disappeared around the corner. The story had ended where it began, with simple human decency triumphing over cruelty, and a champion defined not by victories in competition, but by his willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In voiceover, Frank's words echoed through the night air. Some fights are worth having, and some people are worth fighting for. The most important battles weren't won with fists or fame, but with the quiet courage to stand up when standing up mattered most. The neon sign continued to flicker as traffic passed by, carrying the message that Murphy's family diner remained what it had always been, a place where everyone was family, heroes were welcome, and good people could count on finding both safety and community when they needed it most. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.